Name things. This goes back to, you can look at a Swedish scientist, his name was Carl van Linnaeus.
And John and Blumenblatt too.
And John and Blumenblatt. What they did in Europe was they created a social classification status, right? They identified Asians as yellow, Africans as black, Americans as red, and European as white people. They created this color class system, all right? And by them creating this caste system, they were able to keep you in a specific social status. Once they started set up places, things like the Bureau of Vital Statistics under Walter Plecker, now they started putting on documents, your birth certificate, so on and so forth. You're classified as Negro, black, colored. This came from the Europeans. They first used this in India, this social caste system. They used it in India. So you had certain Indians who were classified as quote-unquote white.
And they were dark.
And they were dark. And certain ones that were of a poor economic status, they were classified as black, Negro, whatever the case may be.
Color.
And they were the same complexion. You see what I'm saying? That's why in North Africa to this day, you have individuals like Mustafa Hefni, who's from North Africa, who's darker than me, but his social political status is white. Because free white persons was a legal classification. It was a legal status. You see what I'm saying? We got caught up in this. Now, when you look at the Sunji Free Moors Act, right? The Sunji Free Moors Act, some dark-skinned Moors in South Carolina were obtained, and they were being classified as Negroes, black people. They went to court, and they said that we're not Negroes, we're Moors, we're of a royal nobility. They went to court, and because they knew who they were, and because there were treaties in place stating that you could not enslave a Moor, they were free and classified as free white persons. So the European had to realize the way we have to enslave indigenous people is to take away their nationality and reclassify them. Because then they set up laws like the Negro Act and the Christian Black Slave Codes to put you under those laws where you consider to be what? Chattel property.
Subjugated.
Subjugated. Now you're not that free Moor. You're not that Kichwa. You're not that Cherokee. You're not that Lenape. You're a colored person.
You're not a part of no tribal nation.
You're not part of no tribal nation. This is the importance of the Moor scientific Americas. Now, if you're Cherokee, right? I'm Choctaw. He's Seminole. Now we could come under one political body collectively. You see what I'm saying?
Because the Europeans put it outside of those tribal nations, because you got like the $5 Indians, but these Europeans brought their way into these tribes. So people like us who's indigenous people, we can't get into those tribes because they brought into those tribes.
By where the doors roll.
By where the doors roll. So the purpose of Prophet Noble Drew Ali was to create a political banner for those who were out of that social construct of those tribes, that we could come under one political umbrella.
Body politic.
Because we was outside of that body politics, because the pale-skinned Europeans, they brought into the doors roll and became the $5 Indians. Today, when you go on most of these reservations, you're going to see
they look European.
Pale-skinned people saying that they're Indians or indigenous people, but they're not. It's really us. But through our classification, we today identify ourselves as black, Negro, colored, but we have reminiscences of our grandparents telling us that, you know, we Cherokee, so forth and so on, and we just listen to that and we like, oh yeah, my grandmother was Cherokee. I got a picture of her hair down to her, you know, down to the floor and everything. But at the end of the day, that's who we are.
And this was intentionally done. When the Europeans got here, there were specific differences in the phenotype of tribes between the Mongoloid nomadic Indian
that came later,
and the dark-skinned melanated quote-unquote black so-called Negro Indian or Aboriginal or mound builder. We would be considered the Aboriginal mound builders. Then you had the nomadic ones who lived in the Midwest, who lived in teepees. You see what I'm saying? The Europeans said, you know what? Let's find a way to subdivide these tribes. Let's get the more Mongoloid ones to intermarry with us, take on European customs, and sign treaties to cede away land, and then exclude us outside of that. You see what I'm saying? Even after Abraham Lincoln passed the 4 Emancipation Proclamations, inclusive of 13 minutes, 20 sections, in the Freedmen's Bureau, we were classified as freedmen. Now, a lot of these tribal members that mixed with the European, right, like Stan Watie, researcher, his name was Stan Watie, who was signing these treaties, right? When they signed these treaties and ceded away these land, when these treaties was reconstructed, because they had a Masonic covenant with an individual by the name of Albert Pike. Right? Albert Pike was one of the top Freemasons here in the Americas, 33-degree Mason. He also started the KKK. Right? What he did was he helped some of the tribes.
He was a Satanist too.
Right, he was a Satanist, right. He wrote a book called Morals and Dogma. You decode that book, Morals and Dogma, and you can see he was pushing the agenda from the Holy Crusades, along with the Catholic Church, to specifically enslave Native American Moors in general here in the Americas. That was the agenda, because it goes back to the war with the Moors, the Saracens, and
Hannibal, all of that.
All of that, right. It goes back to that war, going back to the Christendom versus Islam.
And that's happening right now.
It's happening right now. It goes back to that war. So when you decode that book, you can see what Albert Pike was doing when he came here. He specifically handpicked certain Native American tribal leaders, made them Freemasons, had them sign treaties, and then on top of that, he convinced some of them to fight on the side of the Confederacy because they were pushing slave states. Now, it was another group called the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was a fraternal order of European men who were pushing slave states. They aligned themselves with the Confederacy, who also aligned themselves with the KKK. The KKK was like the military for the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, Stan Wati, who was of mixed blood, right? He was signing these treaties, ceding away our land against what we agreed upon. We didn't want to do that. So we went to war against the Knights of the Golden Circle, against the KKK, against the Confederacy. You see what I'm saying? Now, in 1866, because the Confederacy lost, Albert Pike was in prison, they reconstructed those treaties. Those are the lawsuits you hear about with the freedmen. The freedmen, which we would be classified as freedmen, right? They're fighting in court as we speak even today for those 1866 reconstructed treaties. For what? For tribal membership, to be compensated for our ancestors being enslaved. But again, this was pushed by high-ranking Masonic Confederate generals like Albert Pike, and also, again, the Knights of the Golden Circle. This was a secret agenda, and a lot of people don't talk about the Knights of the Golden Circle. But John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Abraham Lincoln, was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle.
Abraham Lincoln was a Moor. He was a Melungeon.
He was a Melungeon.
He was a Melungeon.
Explain what a Melungeon is for those who may not.
A Melungeon is a people who's indigenous, like in Tennessee area, and they got like indigenous blood, Turkish, Moorish, bloodline. So they're very dark-skinned people. And when Europeans came in contact with them, they didn't know how to classify them because they'll see one who be like maybe a little bit light, and then his son would be dark, and then the other one would have blonde hair but dark skin. So they couldn't classify them, so they called them Melungeons. But they were really of Moorish descent. And Abraham Lincoln was a Melungeon, was a Moorish descent or whatever. And we gotta realize too is that we got this idea is like when they enslaved us, we went to slavery peacefully. Like, okay, Mr. White Man, we're gonna go in slavery now, all right? We was fighting with the all the way into the 1900s, like slaying them throughout the Americas. You know what I'm saying? Like all throughout, like the Seminole Wars and all this stuff. Like we was killing so many Europeans that they had to have basically Abraham Lincoln had to have the Emancipation Proclamation. It was not only dealing with North and South and you know what they're gonna do with the economy, but we was actually killing Europeans throughout the Americas. You know what I'm saying? So we didn't go into slavery so peaceful like they make it seem like these Europeans just came to America and we just bowed down to them without fighting with them. We fought them up to the 1900s fighting with them.
The slave system that we know of was not successful. All right? We got to look at the institution of slavery. The institution of slavery still exists today. I'm going to get to that. Like the brother said, look at the Yamasee War of 1715, the Creek Wars, 1812, 1813, 1814, the Seminole Wars, the war that Washington had against Europeans. But they codified who those people were as Indian. That was us.
They said it was a Negro
fighting against us. Even when you look at the story of Nat Turner, right? Nat Turner had indigenous bloodline. He was descendants of the Port Hamon, Native Americans in Virginia.
Descendants of the who?
Port Hamon.
Port Hamon.
Of Virginia.
Of Virginia.
He was fighting over his people's land.
Is it his land?
The story they told in the movie was not accurate. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of us was fighting to keep our people's land. Now, he talked about Abraham Lincoln. I talked about the 4 proclamations, inclusive of the 13 amendments, 20 sections. Which one of those sections say that slavery shall be outlawed with the exception of what?
Exception of a crime.
Of a crime. So before the European got here, let me know what prison systems you had. There weren't any. The prison systems came when the European came. Remember when the Queen of England sent the Europeans over here, she let them out of the jails, the insane asylum. Those are the worst of the worst. Remember gangs in New York, they were all criminals.
Right.
So the industrial prison complex was created here in the Americas when the European came. Prior to that, there wasn't no jails. So the European understood that the only way to continue slavery, even though it was abolished, was to create the prison industrial complex. And they created laws that were specifically dealing with enslaving us and throwing us in jail.
Once you call yourself black, you
by being black. So say this, they put a law that, all right, it's against the law for 5 blacks to congregate. This is against the law right here. In ancient time, 5 blacks to congregate. Guess what? We going to jail. If you look at a Caucasian woman, that's a crime. You go to jail. So because of all of the revolts and the revolution was going with our indigenous ancestors on this land, because they can never really enslave us on this land, that's why we were taken to places like Europe, Africa, so on and so forth. They realized we have to create a systematic process of slavery, an industrial prison complex system. They institutionalized slavery into the prison system. That's legal slavery.
And once you say you black, you automatically committed a crime.
You already guilty by saying you black.
Yeah.
I just say driving while black. You identify yourself as civil mortuus, black. That's a crime. That's why they had the Christian black slave codes. Read those codes and see what you can and can't do. The so-called Negro Acts. See what you can do and you can't do.
Christian black codes. That's why we say. That's why we say according to black, according to science, means death. We're not talking about the cosmos. We're talking about a political social status that was created. That when you call yourself that term in this political construct, you automatically committed a crime. It's automatically against the law. You automatically civilly you automatically dead in the eyes of the law. That's what we're talking about. But we can't get emotional because we're talking about legalese.
Jurisprudence.
That's what we're talking about. And it's a fact we're talking about.
The thing is, when like say if I'm